on? Is it on? Okay. Very good. I can't really tell. That means it's good sound. Could be louder. Okay. But now it's feeding back. Best laid plans when things go wrong. See, we were talking about this before. It was like, that would be really funny if this whole talk was a complete disaster. And you would all be super sympathetic, and it would be ironic, and we would all laugh about it. And we're also live streaming, so it would be even more ironic. My name is DeSantis. I'll be hosting this talk. I'm here with 3 musicians with a vast range of musical experiences on stage and backstage and in studios and in classrooms. Please welcome Photay, Patrice, Rushen, and Laura Escudé. So this talk is a kind of a different thing for Loop, because most of the time we have people up here talking about their incredible accomplishments and how well everything has gone, and everyone is super impressed by how amazing their output and careers have been. And we're here to talk about failure and when things didn't work. And I think this is a nice conversation to have, because it sort of it opens the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz curtain, right, on the reality that something always goes wrong. And the more time you spend on stage, the more things go wrong. I figured I would sort of break the ice for this one by talking about a personal, tragic failure of my own on stage. So in a former life, I was a professional percussionist, and I played in this chamber orchestra, and I did an arrangement for this orchestra that was super complicated, and I was playing drum set. And the gig was at Carnegie Hall. So the stakes felt reasonably high. And at Carnegie Hall, some of you know this, there's many venues in America that have very strict rules about the union workers setting up gear. This is great, it protects their jobs, I'm a big supporter of this, but you always have to check your own gear after they set up your gear, because you know you need it configured in your way. I was playing drum set. It was a very specific and weird drum set, because it was this arrangement of electronic music, so it had all these strange pieces and parts. And I checked it, what I thought was reasonably well. We did a sound check, everything was fine. We get to the gig that night, and about a bar into the piece, the screw that holds the beater on the bass drum pedal fell out. And if any of you are drummers and you understand the mechanics of a bass drum pedal, that means the pedal beater slid down to the bottom and therefore had no range to reach the kick drum. And I had about 6 more minutes to play. Now at that moment, those 6 minutes is like 80 years. So I'm on stage fronting an entire orchestra with an arrangement that I did and no kick drum. And the kick drum is really important for this tune. And so I'm starting to try to think about, like, it's a kick drum, can I kick it? Does that work? Can you kick a kick drum? The answer is no. It doesn't work. It makes almost no sound. Maybe if your shoes were made of kick drum beaters, it would work. It didn't work, and I was desperately trying to figure out how to rearrange the part in real time so that I could play the floor tom. It was a total disaster. Total disaster. And yet here I am. We survived. So now I want to open the floor up to y'all to see, to hear your horror stories from the stage. First of all, are there any perfect gigs? Does it ever go perfectly?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is not the answer I was
saying. That's good. The good news.
That out there.
No.
I mean, gigs go well all the time. You know, there's perfect gigs, and then there's less than perfect gigs. You know.
Tell me about some perfect gigs. Maybe this will turn into a different sort of talk.
Yeah, I like putting that energy out there because I have a presentation tomorrow, so I like putting the energy out that tomorrow is going to be flawless, and I hope that you all be there. But yeah, we can't hear ourselves on stage either.
Sure.
We better check all the mics.
Yeah.
Huh? Mic check, check, check.
Hello?
Check.
Check.
Can you hear?
Check, check.
So Laura, I can't really hear, but you guys I do hear, I think.
Yeah, and the monitoring on stage is very echoey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Yes.
Okay, maybe we can work on that. But so there are perfect gigs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes the amount of preparation that you do for the gig increases the chances of it going perfectly. That doesn't also mean, though, that the things that you plan for are going to always, you know, something may come up, but your ability to react to that and turn that momentary lemon into lemonade depends on how well you planned for everything that is within your control. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think most of the time, just like in everything else that we do as artists, a big part of the learning experience sometimes comes from the thing that didn't go as you planned it to, but still you landed on your feet because you have the ability and hopefully the planning and technique that goes into our work as artists allows for you to be able to take that moment in the moment and make it right, because there's a reason that most of that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah.
And you can always learn something from it, and it doesn't have to be a disaster. But if you don't plan and then the spontaneity of the moment happens, you can't react fast enough, and that's a lot of times when things really can be disastrous and go wrong.
Yeah. You have something?
Yeah, yeah. Similarly, I think the surprises are sort of where you walk away from a gig thinking like that couldn't have gone better, and maybe it was nerve-wracking in the moment, but it really made you feel alive. Whether it's someone who somehow got on stage and said something to you in the middle of a show, but it gave you this extra energy and you didn't expect it, and it kept things real, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but that raises an interesting question. It's like there's a certain type of mess up that happens on stage that you want to try to cover, but then beyond a certain level, do you then try to incorporate the audience into the mistake? Is there a kind of camaraderie that can happen then? Or do you try to always avoid those situations?
I think it depends on the situation that you're in.
Yeah.
If you're in an intimate club or something like that, something goes wrong and you stop and you bring the audience in on it, I think that that's appropriate. But if somebody's paid $150 to be there, they don't want to know you made a mistake.
Yeah.
They want it perfect.
Right.
So, or if you're seeing something on television where there are no do-overs if it's live, like a show like the Grammys or Emmys or Tonys or something like that. And you're supposed to have the chops to be able to catch it in midair and keep on moving, turn it into something else. So I think the situation sometimes dictates how much of the experience is creating an environment and an illusion, oral illusion for your audience, and then certain kinds of other environments support part of your process, which could involve recovering from a mistake or starting over if something went wrong or didn't work, or doing something different if the electricity goes out and your set involves electronic equipment or prelays or Pro Tools or something, or Ableton. And you know what I'm saying? Best laid plans. And then, and then you have to figure out something else to do.
Yeah.
You know.
It's interesting, the idea that your physical distance from the audience has something to do with
I
that,
think so.
right? Like if they're right there, there's more intimacy, and then there's maybe more room for error.
Yeah.
Or more room to allow it. Laura, you had an interesting story when we talked before about
Yeah,
television.
I'm actually not sure that I'm on, so I think we'd be having a moment. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay, awesome. Which story are you speaking of?
Yeah, okay, you had a couple TV stories, right?
There's been a couple of TV stories. Okay, so most recently, I was doing American Idol this year, and it was the finale, and it's live. Like, it's live television, which is different from live touring. You know, it's a little more forgiving in an arena because it's not captured for ever and ever. So we're doing the show, and there was a count in, and it's like, okay, go. And so I press the button, and we start to hear my voice saying the intro of a completely other track. And so I stopped it very quickly. And the person coming on stage was Lionel Richie, and it was All Night Long. And the song that was about to play was Nick Jonas. Can't remember the name of the song. Anyway, so it was a very big moment. And luckily, because of my training and all the stuff that I've been through, I quickly pressed stop before the song came on. And that's why we have these cues in the beginning, because it's like, well, we're only hearing that in our in-ears, right? So no one knew except for the band and the musicians behind the stage. The directors were like, where's the music, where's the music? And I, second later, started the right music. But that was a terrifying moment for me because it was like, you know, I don't know how many people watch that show, but it's a lot of people. And if Nick Jonas's song had come on for Lionel Richie, that would have been just horrifying. So it turns out that a certain control that I was using, I'm not gonna name any names, it double triggers sometimes. And we have this setlist software. And so just you press the button and it goes to the next song. And you press the button and it goes to the next song. Well, what happened was I pressed the button and it went down to the second song. So now I've got a Max for Live patch that prevents that from happening. Yay. But yeah, terrifying, but also awesome because I found out that that controller is not to be trusted. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you for not saying the name of the controller.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Yep. It wasn't an Ableton controller.
Okay, good to know. But you mentioned Grammys, Emmys. You've done TV stuff as well.
Yeah.
Did that always go well?
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been some near misses. Mm-hmm. Television is not, you know, as Laura says, it's not very forgiving in terms of that. And that's why in the production meetings, they talk it to death because they want to make sure that everything goes well to the degree that it can. But there are instances sometimes where even the people who are doing all the talking and all the planning and everything, sometimes because people know most everyone likes music. And because they like music and that's a part of the fiber of their lives, they feel like they know everything about it. They have maybe no clue as to the process to get the end result because typically their liking the music is always them on the end of the receiving the result of the work or of the planning or of the practice or whatever. So there was an instance where I was working a particular year on the Grammys where they always would start with a very big opening number, huge. And this particular year, the artists were Prince and Beyonce, who were gonna open the show. So you go through rehearsals individually, and then you go through a rehearsal day of show. From the top of the show, they run it all the way down to make sure that they can do the set changes in time, to make sure that everything is gonna work properly. Then they reset, and we go. That particular opening involved a lot of moving parts and had been rehearsed a particular way that was on point and pretty much flawless because those two artists rehearse a lot and get it just the way they need it to be. And it involved the use of some pre-laid tracks because the band was way off to the side, and it involved, you know, some pre-laid tracks, which had worked perfectly in rehearsal and everything was fine. The day of the show, the director and producer decided, wow, wouldn't it be great if they would just do this live?
Sure.
And as music director for the show, they come to me and they say, go up there and tell Prince to play this thing live. I'm like, damn. So I knew this was a bad idea for so many reasons. But I said, well, you know, I'll go up there. And so Prince and I were pretty good friends. And it was because I'd known him since the very beginning of his career. And although we didn't see each other often, we somehow managed to see each other at pinnacle, cornerstone places in his career. And he trusted what I would say. And so I went up there and I said, okay, here's what they want you to do. And I explained what the producers had asked me to tell him to forget all of this rehearsing that you did, getting the timing exactly right for all the people who are involved in this, including cameramen and sound people in the booth and everything for this show that's going to be live. They want you to just play it live. And he says, what do you think I should do? So now I'm like, okay, am I supposed to be loyal and accommodating to the producer and director of the show? Or am I supposed to really say what I think and protect this moment and this artist as the music director for the show? And I said, well, here's the situation. The people in the booth aren't prepared for live. Camera people, operators, are not prepared for live. The people in the audience ain't gonna know. And the people watching television are not gonna know. They're just gonna wanna see a great performance. So if I'm you, and I'm not, but if I'm you, and I know that when I finish this rehearsal, they are going to run down this entire 2-hour show and then reset. And that when I walk out on the stage, that is the first moment that the whole world is gonna see. I'm probably gonna opt to do the thing that makes me feel the most comfortable. And he says, I understand. And I said, cool. I said, now, you will be live in the house, playing live on top of these tracks. And I will be in the house and I will make sure that in the house, everything is the way that it's supposed to be. I said, but I am not in the booth. I am not a camera person. I am not running your set. He says, I understand. So that's what happened. And when I went back out there, the producer and directors were like, well, what's gonna happen here? And I said, well, he wasn't really into it. And I was like, okay, my job is either over or it's gonna work out. That moment in the show, by the way, still to this day, is one of the moments that they always show when they talk about the Grammy moments. In fact, at the Grammy Museum down the street, that's the first thing that comes up. And I'm like, wow, I'm really glad we made that decision, because that was one of those situations that could have been a disaster.
Wow. That's amazing. It's a great story.
Means music always wins. That's what.
Yeah.
Do that. Do what you need to do to present always at a level where you can be proud of it.
I mean, that's an interesting case where things really were worked out. You had best laid plans, and what went wrong was a change in those plans, not something that actually happened on stage. Right. I mean, Laura, I know you've had this happen in your playback career many times, where artists make last-minute decisions about things.
I don't think I have a mic anymore, so.
Is her mic on now?
It's on.
Oh, did you put it back on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool,
Yeah.
awesome. So many just last-minute decisions. I mean, there's obviously in this world we can't talk about a lot of things, but I can allude to things, I guess, and just a huge festival that I was doing, and we'd come up with this set list, and it was amazing, and everything flowed, and we spent like all these days working on it, and it was great. And no one knew what was gonna happen, of course. And we had done our best guess, me and the musical team, to figure out how it was gonna flow. And I thought it sounded amazing. It was like, we should absolutely do this. We spent all this time crafting these transitions and these remixes and sound effects, and it was just like, it was amazing. And literally 10 minutes before the show, some celebrities walked in, and they're like, oh, you should start it with this song. No, you should do this song instead. And you're just like, shh, So we ended up changing the whole entire show right before the show, and it was a disaster. It just sounded terrible because no one knew what was going on. And I was needed on stage to help get everything set up on stage, but meanwhile, I was backstage trying to edit and make all of the show go well, or at least accommodate all of these new guest artists that started showing up. And it was like one of the worst experiences ever, because there's just so unsettling knowing that you need to be on stage making sure that everything there is good to go and you're ready to start the show. Meanwhile, you're backstage trying to deal with some new people coming into the mix and giving their 2 cents, not knowing what it takes to do and what the music takes to edit and go through all that stuff. It's like, oh, I've got this idea. You should just be able to handle it in 2 seconds, right? Yeah, no, that editing and printing and bouncing and bringing in background vocals for the new guest artists or taking them out or whatever, it takes time. So needless to say, that one didn't go so well. But after that, I always decided that I wanted to have a tech person on stage, especially in those big festivals, because it's like impossible to be editing and, doing the show and teching everything at the same time when things like that happen. So, yeah.
Photay, I wanted to switch over to you for a second, because a bunch of the stories that you sent to me, you sent me this great list of like amazing disasters that you've had, and there was a kind of theme in some of yours that had to do with you persevering, like you alone triumphing over adversity. And I want to talk a little bit about your Ecuador gig.
Oh,
because
yeah.
this was like, I love this story, because there's no reason why you should have been on that stage.
Right.
Can you tell this one?
Yeah. Yeah, so I recently played in Ecuador, first gig in South America, and I was really excited. And I played a festival the weekend before, and was all excited the week of, felt fine. 2 days before, I started to feel really sick, and the kind of like feverish sick, where your head's just not in the right place, and you just can't think properly. It's more than just having kind of like respiratory symptoms, and I was like, all right, I was calling up some friends, and I'm like, yeah, you'll be fine, whatever. And I woke up the morning of the flight, and I felt awful, but got to the airport, I was like, and I like traveling, I like being in countries where I don't speak the language, but when you're sick, that's a whole nother level of disorientation, and I had a layover in Mexico City that was pretty long. It was maybe like 4 or 5 hours. So I got there, I was trying to keep myself sane. I was reading a book, I was listening to some ambient music, and then it got to this point where I was like, whoa, okay, wait, like, your temperature must be really high right now. Something's like you actually have to take some action right now. This is like beyond. So I went around, I was like looking for a nurse of some sort, and speaking to a woman who was getting on a flight. I was like, do you know if there's like a nurse or a doctor nearby? And she was like, are you sick? Stay back. It's like, and I was feeling kind of crazy and alienated. Found the spot, green cross on the wall, and I went in, and my temperature was super high, and they had to give me an IV, which I hate. That's a big fear of mine as it is, needles, and so I was like, all right, whatever you have to do. So I have an IV in my arm, and the flight is in 30 minutes. So all right, I guess get hydrated real quick and then get on the flight. And they walk away and leave me in this room.
With an IV.
With an IV.
Sure.
The rest of the airport is freezing, by the way. This is the only warm room in the vicinity. And they all leave. And I'm sitting there alone. I was like, excuse me, I have a flight in like 20 minutes. And they come back and say, oh, it's okay. And it was like kind of calming. I was like, yeah, I guess it's okay, but I have a flight. And they're like, yeah, if you miss the flight, we can get you on another flight for free. I was like,
where was this?
This was in Mexico City.
Okay.
On a layover. And so then inevitably, I start to feel better. I take the IV out. I go dashing to the gate, and they're like, oh, the flight just took off. It's on time. So I went to the desk, and they said, oh, the next flight is in 6 hours. So I ended up in the airport for 12 or 13 hours with this crazy fever, and I landed in Ecuador at maybe like 5 a.m. to the warmest greeting, the promoters, and this brand new world, and everything's beautiful, and this drive to Quito was amazing. And I slept most of the day, and I thought, all right, this is doable. I just, sleep it off. And kind of seeing the venue, and it's all really amazing. It's a really exotic venue, and I was excited, but I just didn't feel capable of playing. I could barely speak, and then the show happened, and I stood up to the plate, and I felt 100% throughout the whole show. Although not 100%, I felt a little slow, and it almost kept me in the moment, whereas I'm usually, I'm using the computer a lot, and there's a lot of technical stuff going on, electronic, and it's easy to kind of forget about the crowd, which I hate. I always want to look up and be more connected, but sometimes, you're using a DAW or something, and you have to look at the screen, and that puts you in a different world. But I don't know, I was operating slower, and I was looking up more and just taking it in more, which I find hard to do sometimes. And it ended up being a great show. I just felt like I connected with the audience more and the music on a different level. And then it ended, and I crashed, and I went completely back.
Amazed they even let you on the flight. I mean, these days it's like they stop people who have fevers from getting on planes. But this was recently, right?
Yeah, this was back in July.
Okay, maybe different standards at that airport.
I mean, by the time I got into the flight, I was feeling a lot better. Yeah, it was just intense. I mean, I guess touring also, you start to take it for granted, where you realize, how air travel is it's easier than it's ever been, and how you can tour in these obscure parts of the world as a solo artist and hop right on. And then something like that happens, and you realize how vulnerable you are.
What I love about that story is that what should have been a disastrous gig, you sort of somehow turned into a really exceptional one because of the fact that you were in this different headspace, which is really interesting. I mean, have you had shows where you were too sick to perform but did anyway?
Yeah. I mean, it does put you, I can really relate to what you're saying, because it certainly creates a different perspective for you in the moment. I mean, you always want to be in the moment, but when you're sick, some of your guard is just down, and you're like, I'm just down. And you're looking at that point for just the ability to get through it. But what you become acutely aware of, which was what I was relating to your story, what you become acutely aware of are the things that are happening and the kind of energy that in that moment that gives you, the kind of energy that you get when you're playing, and that people receive it, and there is definitely something that they give back.
Like
You're not as aware of it when you're healthy and you're just doing your thing. But when you're sick, you're kind of aware of a lot of other kinds of things, because you feel so bad. It's like you're not participating quite in the same way. And if you can get through it, it's typically because of other energies, other things that are happening that you even take for granted, as a performer, typically, because when you're sick, you can't. And then that energy just gets you through it. Of course, afterwards, you're out.
Done.
But that's the proof that there's something that happens in that connection between the audience and what's happening on the stage.
I have a kind of general question. If you had to choose between a massive catastrophe at a low stakes gig or a small one at a high stakes gig, what would you pick? Or is it too situationally dependent to be able to answer that question?
I think for me, massive catastrophe at a low stakes gig.
So the
Just 'cause-
stakes are more important.
Yeah. Because at a huge gig, just the tiniest thing is amplified. And I think kind of like Patrice was saying earlier, it just, you notice, people notice. And especially when you're on a tour where there's 150 or 200 people, and there's a big glaring mistake. If you're in a room with an arena full of people, 20,000, they might not know about the mistake, and oftentimes they don't, but I don't know, that's just me personally. I'd rather have the high stakes gigs go better, yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Because there's so much in what we do that's connected to your last success, in
Yeah.
quotes. Your next gig is dependent upon when somebody last saw you do something.
Last saw you do something well.
Yes,
No, or badly.
Or badly. And so you do want it the perception to always be good. So yeah, since you learn stuff when you fail. I happen to think that a part of the failure is a magnificent learning experience. But you'd rather kind of do that when you can go, oh, so I won't let that happen you can prepare for the major gig in a way that says, okay, dot your I's and cross all your T's because of the last experience that you had, that maybe you're the only one that knew that, but it was like, ooh, if this had happened in another situation, you know. So yeah, I would rather have a high, massive mistake on a low stakes gig.
Yeah, and those small mishaps stick with you. Like, I mean, some people have the ability to move on and block that out, but I think a lot of us, you know, it happens in the beginning of the performance, and I don't know, it's in your head the whole time, and like that can kind of have a domino effect, and you might screw up again because you're fixated on that didn't go as planned. And and I think with the smaller gigs sometimes too, sometimes it feels more forgiving, where like the crowd is closer. I mean, I had it recently in Brooklyn, where I live. It was like a hometown gig after a lot of touring, and I was thinking, I was kind of taking it for granted. I was thinking, oh, I've been touring all year, and this is like the last gig for a while, and I, you know, maybe I practiced a little less just because I was like, you've been practicing a ton, and you know, you can relax a little bit, and then it happened, like similar to you, the kick drum on my drum pad, the first kind of big moment of the show, just nothing. And we had this ambient pad going, and that just persisted. It was just kind of the most anticlimactic thing you could dream of. And but there were people in the audience saying like, you know, I just got on the mic and I said, hey, I'm sorry, we have to take a second and figure this out. And someone yelled out like, it's all good, we love you, take your time. I was like, oh, okay, thank you for that. And I don't know, I mean, in like a concert hall or something, you don't really have that intimacy, and it's kind of more of like the dark void that you're looking into.
Yeah, I definitely think I push boundaries way more at a smaller gig. Like, if you come to my presentation tomorrow, I'm going to do all of the things, but I would never do that in an arena. In an arena tour, it's like, what is not going to screw up? You know, what is the safest thing? And it seems like that would be the moment to be forward thinking, but it just really, like Patrice said, it just depends, you know, like your next gig depends on this gig now. So safety, I think, is often more important in those cases than doing the next most innovative thing. Yeah.
Just had something to add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I usually think in those terms too, but there was one particular gig at the Red Rocks amphitheater, and I had been doing kind of more of not a DJ set, but it was less live than I wanted it, and I had been wanting to incorporate drumming and more keys, and I started to build that new show, and Red Rocks happened to be the first gig where I could play that new show, and I thought, this is probably a bad idea. But I don't want to get in front of a beautiful stone canyon amphitheater and play mostly just the computer. And so for me, it was maybe almost a little selfish, but I was like, I want to actually play, and I want to be more connected to the music in this like historic space. And it was risky. It ended up going well, but I don't know. I don't know if it was the best idea, but.
I mean, I think that's a really good point, because I think if you're doing something that is dependent on electronics particularly, then I think that there's a part of that just dictates how you have to prepare, the style in which you have to prepare, and the kinds of things you have to prepare for. When you involve other players, other musicians, or playing live, part of what you want is the risk-taking that comes out of being able to share in the music making. You prepare by rehearsing, or you prepare by practicing, or something like this. But when you walk out there, you are all in the moment, and for every individual that's on the stage, that moment has its own unique thing. And I don't know how many of you have ever played jazz or classical music in any kind of ensemble situation, but between players, there is this telepathy that is a part of what we just do that allows for, because we have the same vocabulary and the same feeling about music, to be able to respond not only to the moment, but to one another in the moment. And that's like jumping off the cliff and figuring out how you're gonna land on the way down. But that's what we do all the time. So I think that the situation that you're in and the kinds of individuals that are involved with you in that situation, or if there's the virtual partner in the computer or whatever, dictates to how much risk is involved. Because if music does not, it's supposed to be experiential, my opinion. If that experience does not allow for that audience to walk away having experienced something, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't deliver. I could do that at home. You know what I mean? I could play the MP3 on my own computer. I don't need you to play it for me for $50. I can do that at home. So I'm wanting an experience that I can't have at home.
Yeah.
And I think part of our challenge, because we have become so technology dependent, is to be able to identify, is the technology and the use of it another color in the palette of the way I can present things? Or is my dependence on it just allowing me to be able to just do playback? And I think we're at a point now where everybody kind of realizes that, man, I would love when I go to hear or see somebody to walk away fulfilled and get something from that experience that I would not have gotten at home.
Yeah. That's a really tricky thing. I mean, as we become more dependent on technology for the performance, we have more options, but we also have fewer ways to sort of make those connections and riff if something goes wrong. And it reminds me of a quote that I remember from when we talked before, where you said, if you're a band, you have options. If it's electronics, you have nothing. Meaning, like, if you're completely dependent on the gear to do the work for you and the gear goes down, there's no room now for a bass solo. That's not going to happen because the bass player is in the box and it's all gone. And I mean, I guess in a case of like a catastrophic power failure, this happens in any amplified situation. But I think you're onto something really big here. Like, you can make something work with the band. For you two, Laura and Photay, what are you doing in this situation where so much is dependent on the stuff that's in the computer?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I grew up playing drums in bands, and like, yeah, kick drum skin would break, but somehow you would play without the kick drum. You could still play, but
I tried.
yeah, right. But there's still sound, and you know, especially if everything's running out of the computer, you know, that's intense. Once that goes out, yeah, that's like your whole world. It's all your eggs in one basket. That's what people tell you not to do in life. But yeah, I mean, that's something I'm still working on. Like, ideally, I love the idea of, okay, everything failed, you know, something that's live and acoustic. I mean, for me, it would probably be like some type of rhythmic, drum-oriented thing that you can just jump into. It's more acoustic if all the electronics fail. For me, there's certain things like within my set where they don't go according to plan, and it's almost like a challenge in every show. Like, I kind of, because so many things, there are a lot of samples being looped, and kind of doing dubs, kind of in more of like a dub style where you're bringing in pre-recorded stuff, you're using delay and echo. But within that, not planning so much. So you have like these pre-recorded elements, but you're doing a lot on the fly, and you kind of allow for that improvising elsewhere. But the backup thing, I'm still figuring that out, yeah.
Yeah,
You're doing a lot with redundant systems.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, when you're doing huge arena tours, you have to have a backup system. There's all different levels of fail-safes that we have. I mean, it can only go so far, you know. We're like, okay, so we've got this, you know, switcher, but then the switcher is not actually redundant. So then we got to get another switcher. Yeah. But we try to make it as redundant as possible, and yeah, we've definitely used the switcher quite a few times, and you know, there's another reason for the backup computer, and that's editing during the show. when the artist decides they want to play a completely different edit. And so I've switched over to the backup computer and edited that, and then switched back to the A after that song's over. So there's been all sorts of reasons to use redundant systems, not just for fail-safes, but yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of comfortability, in having that there. We used UPSs when we're doing live shows as well. So if the power goes out, then you've got about an hour. But if the power goes out, you kind of have a bigger problem because everything on stage is going to go out. And if there's UPSs, and it's fine. But so I just generally like to make sure that my world is as safe as possible. For my own live set, I don't typically use redundancy because it gets expensive, right? To bring a whole other set of things, especially when you're traveling. So I do at times, and I will show that tomorrow during my presentation. But it helps me feel comfortable, but it's not always practical to have a whole second setup of things. And then there's typical, things like controllers, which they can't be completely redundant either. So there's only so far you can go. Like audio, but then if you're relying on looping and things that aren't playing audio in the computer, and then it goes to the backup computer, then it might not sound the same as what you were doing on the A computer. So yeah, I know it's definitely a challenge, but there's been some fun moments where things have kind of melted down a little bit, or I've triggered, been so in the moment where I've stopped playing the track with my controller, in my own live set, and just bouncing around, yeah, trigger this clip, oh, and there's nothing on it. So I think that's happened to everyone, right? Hopefully, but yeah.
I have an interesting question, mostly for Laura and Patrice, because both of you are involved as performers, but also as educators. And I'm wondering, as teachers, how much of this sort of disaster preparation is that a part of your educational strategy? Or is this something that students need to sort of learn in the heat of battle?
For me, I think it's a big part of it is to talk about it. But I think for all of us, it puts this question in play. What are you doing and why are you doing it? Is your level of music making such that you are involved in music interpretation more so, or music creation more so, or the act of performing? Where is the crux of what you're trying to do? And I'm dealing with young artists where the center of their being involves music creation first. Even those who just say, well, I'm just a bass player. I just want to be a bass player. That's all I want to do is play bass. I'm all things bass. They learn about songwriting, not to be a good songwriter, but to learn how to be a better bass player for the song. The songwriter learns what it feels like to be a performer, not to be a performer, but to be able to understand what it's like when they perform songs, what it does to people out there, which influences your writing in a completely different way than if you're only writing from the standpoint of what you think. It's how what you think affects something. And as music interpreters, players, or vocalists who focus on that, to have to go through the exercise of being involved in some aspect of music creation puts you in a different space when somebody does hand you their song. Because now you understand what it took to get it. And your delivery and your point of view is a part of what makes that the experience that it needs to be for an audience to like it or hate it, but have some kind of point of view for it to be delivered. You're that delivery system. So I think our use of technology and our ability to have all of these beautiful possibilities in terms of what we do, at some point you got to say, so what am I doing? To be able to determine how you're going to manage it or how you're going to use it and what aspect of your music making it serves for you. And from the education standpoint, that's pretty much where our philosophical point is the platform for whatever form of creativity or whatever form of expression an artist who's dealing with music where they want to take it.
What about with you, Laura? I mean, you're preparing a lot of playback engineers. That's part of the work
I mean,
that you do.
I work with two kind of different groups of people because it's the two different sides of who I am. And so there's my Master Talk program, those people who want to learn how to be playback engineers and are on the road. And I definitely work with them and just preach, let's be safe, let's not push any boundaries, let's not try to do anything crazy. And that being said, we still are in some respects, not necessarily with the technology, but with our creativity and where we're taking the profession and shifting the perceptions on what we do. But then there's also me working with solo artists and live performers that are looking to take their technology game to the next level. And with those artists, I mean, that's, a passion of mine is to help them grow and learn how to express themselves through technology in a new way. And I absolutely just encourage them to just take it as far as they can, and don't worry about breaking anything, because it's that fear on stage that really can come through. And of course, the more you practice and the more you're comfortable with your gear, the better it will be. But I just think that just throwing some caution to the wind just makes for a better performance, I think, in my eyes. Yeah.
Cool. One of the things we did for this panel was ask people via social media to submit their own horror stories. And we picked out a few that we thought were kind of interesting springboards for more conversation. So I want to jump to a couple of these now. So this is one from my friend Aaron, who's an educator and a performer. I like this one because it's very specific. Having a double-tiered X stand full of electronics and keyboards break mid-performance, everything crashing to the ground and hitting some people in the face who were near the front of the stage. I was headlining. I mean, if you're the opening act, that's totally fine, but as a headliner, it's really bad. But I mean, the idea that like physical objects falling is a thing. And I'm sure you have stories about this because you're working on tours where people are like building mountain ranges on stage.
Oh yeah. I have a good one. I was on tour with Miguel and I was DJing for him and doing playback and at the same time. And I had a tech and they'd put all my gear on the stage and I thought it was all great. And we're on a riser and I have this keyboardist friend of mine next to me and we're both just rocking out, just bouncing around. All of a sudden we look over and the stand with my laptop and everything on it was just like on the ground. Yeah.
And you're still dancing.
We were, I stopped dancing then. Luckily there was a band and the band knew how to play. And that was actually probably one of the moments where I decided to actually really do the auto switch, because before I was like on the fence about the auto switch because there's pluses and minuses, but after that I started doing the auto switch. Yeah.
Have you had these kinds of hardware, like physical catastrophes happen on stage as well?
Yeah, I think when you're dealing with our stuff, you're gonna have things happen like that. But just as she just said, there's an aspect where you have to at some point figure out like what am I doing? If it's music making, then maybe there's a band or somebody, at least one other something that allows for you to be able to make something out of that moment. Hopefully maybe you can do it yourself, by having something up there. I think it a lot has to do with the way we perceive presentations. And if you've got a situation where, I've seen people drop their real instruments on the ground too. I've seen that happen. So it's not just what happens when we do a completely electronic setup where physically things can happen that just prohibit things getting played, but you have a fighting chance if you know how to do something. So if you can whistle,
Yeah.
you better go to whistling if you're stuck. You know what I mean? Something. So that well, I'm being facetious, but what I'm after in what I'm saying is that we're all making music for a reason that should be different than just what is possible in the box. The why of it. Now, these are things that we use and are results of our choices in terms of colors and aspects that we love and technology, and it's beautiful. And they too have artistic places in our palette of possibilities, but they come with a price. And I think you just have to determine what you're going to do about that if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I think the band loves it when playback goes down because they're like, yeah, we get to jam. There's no click anymore. We're like just like back when we were kids, just like jamming on stage. It's great. They'll just have once they realize it, they're like, wait. At first, everyone's like, what's going on? It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like we're not locked down anymore. Like let's look at each other and figure out what we're doing. It's actually quite fun. Mostly, yeah.
Yeah, I think a balance of that is nice if you do have timbres that are so specific to the album, and you're triggering those, whether it's like a drum break or some, and you want it there in the live show. But then having moments where occasionally I do shows with some brass and a guitarist, and more we've been doing kind of these interludes or these sections in between songs or even in songs where just stop all the samples and we're just playing on our own time. And that's super refreshing, and it's, I obviously want to do more of that, but it's a nice blend of that kind of like, we're locked in and then ground's been taken beneath us. And, I haven't had anything fall, but fortunately, but knock on wood somewhere. But back in high school, I used to play in a band, and a good buddy of mine, for some reason, was like, let's all wear sunglasses tonight. I'm like, all right, yeah, why not? And he was the bass player, and he suddenly in the middle of the show, I feel like this just kind of sharp pain in my arm, and I look over and my cymbals just come crashing into me, and my friend is on my drum set, he just falling right on me. So joke's on him, but we set it back up and we just jumped right back in.
Could he not see because of the sunglasses or something?
Yeah, I mean, it was a dark venue. Okay. It was a long time ago, but it was... I
mean, people getting hurt is a scary thing, Aaron's gear falling on stage. So I'm glad to hear that you've all made it through unscathed, for the most part.
Yeah.
So I want to take a look at another one, which is another interesting theme. There it is. So this is another educator that I know, Will Kuhn, teaches music technology in Ohio. He wrote, my electronic music group was doing their first gig after a 2-year hiatus. 2 songs into the set, the USB hub failed and all the MIDI clocks became unsynced. They had like 30 minutes of having to wing it, but they survived. It just looked like they were working extra hard up there. So, I mean, this is another one of these like technology is a blessing and a curse, right? If you're dependent on sync and you have no clock, then you have a bunch of computers that have no way of listening to each other. And this is when it would be really great to have a drummer driving the show. What do you do? I mean, what happens in a situation like this? And what's really impressive about Will's story is that these are students. I mean, he's dealing with high school and middle school students, somehow making this work for 30 minutes. My hat's off to these kids. Sorry about the sync. I hope it wasn't our fault. Yeah, and I think that's an entirely electronic ensemble. So, I mean, that's a tough situation.
Yeah, and I think with electronic music, like purely electronic, the speakers are also like just as important. And this just reminded me of kind of, if you're dealing with like low frequencies and a lot of clarity and, the sound system culture, that's like a huge part of it. And certain gigs were like I had a gig recently where the first song was super powerful, and then I think the amps were overheating on the venue side of things. And the second song comes in and it just dips and just goes all the way, drops in like 20 decibels or something. And And all night that was screwing with my head. It would go really loud and it would just drop. And the high frequencies were like crackling through. And I guess to tie it back to this, it was just sort of like keep playing and work extra hard to just like tune out what's going on with the system. Just keep playing your music, even though I was like, man, this song is anticlimactic. I don't know what I was thinking, but it was just the system. It was making me doubt all these things. And but at the end of the day, the audience came up and it was, and they were saying like, really nice things about it, which was blowing my mind because it sounded crazy to me.
I actually had a situation last weekend at Berkeley with sync stuff that was pretty interesting. So I got invited to perform at Berkeley for their new EDI program launch with a bunch of other amazing people. Yeah, and so the whole thing was we were going to perform with the student ensemble, and we're all going to be synced up. And my entire piece was contingent on looping, right? So I started out and I did like 4 loops, and then it would go to a cellist who did another loop, and then drummer and flautist. Anyway, so it worked great all week. It was awesome. And when it came time for the song, I got on stage, we're all on stage, and I'm like, oh, it's not working. It's not synced. I could see that it wasn't synced. So I was looking over my shoulder at everyone like, hey, it's not working. Like it's not working. You know? And they're like, go, it's gonna be great. I'm like, well, but it's not working. So we literally just had to go, and they ended up listening to my click instead of their click, because we had separate clicks because I was starting out and I was on my own system. And it ended up being really, really beautiful. But I had to get on the mic and I wasn't planning on talking, but I just had to say, hey, we're pushing the boundaries of music and technology here, and sometimes things don't go according to plan. And luckily, the auto-tune wasn't on my mic at that time. So.
Have you had situations with sync, or you're not working with a click much?
Oh. Yeah. A lot of times, not just in a live situation can sync get really weird, but like movies for motion pictures, or having to, sync to picture, and you're running a sequence or something like that, and for whatever reason, there's something that just was fine yesterday, and today is not. Things happen like that all the time, and you have to figure out, what to do. So sync issues don't only affect the live thing, but they affect in the studio. It's kind of critical for just about anything where you're, having to sync to picture, and we're using more and more and more technology in terms of even the orchestration and the way that things are done. So yeah, it affects everybody. When it's not working, it's just not working, and you got to figure out, like right now, what you're going to do about it. So those students learned a very valuable lesson that none of them are ever going to forget, and they'll each figure out how they're going to handle it on the basis of having handled that.
Yeah, I want to pivot a little bit from talking about stage stories to studio stories. I mean, that was a nice segue. I'd be interested in hearing your stories of disasters that happened when making the record, for example.
Well, the biggest hazards come with the idea of sync and utilizing technology that can talk to each other. It's much better now. Things are, companies do realize that while they each may have their particular proprietary characteristics, that if it doesn't work quickly in the context of what most people use, that it's not of tremendous value. But more and more that's kind of come together, so it's a lot more consistent from each platform. It becomes more about the way you think and the layout of a particular software or a particular system that allows you to get to the music fastest based upon the way you think. And I think that now most of the companies have done that. I think that that's why Ableton, it's not a commercial for Ableton, but it sort of is. It's so successful in a lot of different areas because people are using them for lighting. They're using Ableton, you know, obviously for music making, but a lot of other things because of its ease of operation and adaptability to a lot of different things. And I think that that's a big part of the success of the products. I also think that it allows for more collaboration between areas that use music. We've been talking about things that we do on our own, but most of us have to collaborate at some point with something or someone else. Another project, another assignment that utilizes music and doesn't necessarily, has a great idea about what they want, and then we have to decipher that into what that really is going to mean in terms of being able to get it done fast. And none of us have access to the same kinds of budgets that maybe were around when you were completely dependent on the different technology, which was having the musicians that you needed at your disposal right now. Somebody gives you an assignment on Monday and it's due on Thursday, your best bet in terms of being able to provide them with what they want, which is always they're not always having the budget to pay for what they want, is to be able to then utilize the technology to try to give them conceptually what they want and meet the assignment. And so we are very dependent, again, on these tools to help us manage what we need to do creatively, even in a collaborative format or that happens a lot in the studio format.
Any horror stories from you guys in the studio?
It wasn't horror. I mean, it actually turned out quite well, but when I was working on my last album, there was a song that was a little more cinematic, and I only worked on it in like stormy weather. It would be a storm coming in, I'd be like, oh, let's hop to it, jump into it. And the power went out. I was working in upstate New York at the time, and the power went out. It was this kind of intense storm, more like a windstorm. And I was like, oh, I don't know if anything backed up, but pretty much, I mean, it was on the laptop, but still, I think like battery was low, and I think everything just turned, just went black. And, but in that moment, it was completely silent. I could hear everything outside, and there was this really eerie sound of a ton of sirens in the distance, like, I guess going to like fix power lines, or I'm not sure what the case was, but I grabbed my Zoom field recorder, I ran outside and just started recording, and it was this weird cacophony of like these ascending tones and these descending tones, like 20 or 30 of them in all different directions. And so I just recorded that for like a minute or two, and it made it into the track. And the track survived, nothing got deleted, but it was a nice turn of events.
Anything from you?
No, I mean, anything in the studio is just incredibly chill compared to live stuff, so I don't know. I mean, there's always the things like your NFR ran out and it's not timed out and you're in the middle of a project, or I don't know. There's nothing like catastrophic, I think, that's happened to me in the studio that I can think of right now. Mostly just because I'm comparing it to things that are completely on a different scale of catastrophe. So.
Yeah.
And you have a different sense of time
Yeah.
in the studio. Live, it's now or never.
Yeah.
And there are situations like that in the studio. Like if it's high, movies are high stake, and TV is high stake. There is no time. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars at that moment, and they want you to get it done, and they want it to be right, and blah, blah. But the difference is, if it's not right, they must take the time to fix it. Whereas you don't have quite that same comfort zone in a live situation, because it's like you're there right now. But they have to get it right before it goes over the air or before it is seen in the theater. So, they will take the time for you to figure out a way to fix it. And sometimes it's spit, gum, and glue. You go back to the old school sometimes to make the new school work. But you do what you need to do, and the time is there to be able to fix it.
There's one more theme I wanted to look at, which is not when things go wrong at the gig, but when you're at the wrong gig. And this was one we got. If we can switch back to my computer for a second. This is one we got from somebody on Facebook. It's kind of long. Being recommended by a friend to play at a party somewhere in the deep end of Germany near Leipzig on a farm, bringing a whole array of machines and meticulously prepared live set with me to end up with 4 people on the dance floor and a request to play something more popular like EDM. Needless to say, this was most definitely one of the highlights of my worst performances ever, like being dressed in a tuxedo to a pool party. Many of us, how many of you had this experience? You were booked for a gig and you were absolutely the wrong person for the gig. I don't know how this happens. Like, why would we be booked for that gig? I've had this happen to me many times. And for me, my experience was that I had a record deal in the early 2000s on a label that was known for a sort of particularly aggressive brand of music. I have no idea why they signed me to this label, because I didn't do that. I made like kind of gentle music. But then people would book me thinking, well, he's on that label, so he must do that kind of music. And then I would show up to these clubs where these people were sort of angry and ready for angry music. And I was like, I'm only going to disappoint you. I have nothing to offer you. So I would love to hear some of your stories about being at the wrong gig.
I mean, I don't think I've ever showed up to a gig like that and it had it be completely different, but I have gotten booked for a lot of like DJ style gigs. I don't do that anymore, but in the past I tried to make it work. Like I'd roll up with all my controllers and my sound card and my 1/4-inch outputs and try to make it work and just have no room and just have everything coming out of the stereo output and mixing my violin and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it just never went really well, because if you're playing in between 2 DJs and they just want to keep the pace moving, and it's like, oh, what's this like experimental music happening now? It's like, it just doesn't quite fit. So now I'm much more particular about like where I'm getting booked, because if you're trying to go RCA into a DJ mixer and everything's coming out those 2 lines and you're not able to mix it, it's just oftentimes doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that a lot. In terms of, I mean, I DJ as well, and I've made a lot of music that's dance floor friendly, but also have a huge interest in like the complete opposite. And so when I do live sets, I try to treat that as like, hey, you can dance to it, but this is live. But there's still a computer involved and a controller, and to me, it's like, oh, if I'm behind decks, that's DJing. But not everyone thinks that. And a lot of the time I've had, somehow, a lot of people jump up on stage, certain maybe more like clubs, so that's possible, and say like, you know, could you play, you know, some Shakira? I'm here with my girlfriend, and you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm playing live right now, but that hasn't happened as much, but that used to happen a lot. And then with the live set, it's usually like, I try to adapt a little bit. Maybe it's like kind of some of the DJ tendencies of like, I played in some like pretty dark clubs before, and it's like, okay, this is more emphasis on the rhythm and the sound system, and I'll kind of extend things more. And that's where it becomes fun. It's like extending a mix and making it darker, more rhythm oriented. And then if it's a gig where it's a little more bright and shiny, and I'll do some more like vocal-oriented tracks. And I don't know, I personally like adapting a little bit, just a little bit to yeah.
I think the idea of whatever you do getting out there can be both a blessing and a curse in that way. For a long time, you know, I played jazz for a long time. At the same time, I was also playing R&B and playing pop music and doing studio work and doing a lot of different kinds of things. The things that jumped out there and got out there started defining who I was to the audience. So if I was called to do a certain kind of gig and they didn't hear what they thought I did, you'd have people like, well, why aren't you doing such and such and such and such? Well, because I'm doing this. Or You know, and so there would be people, and you know, you just played your butt off, and they're like, you know, I'm disappointed because I didn't hear my jam. And the context would have been totally wrong or something like that. So I learned that having our kinds of eclectic tastes and being able to do many different things well is part of what you have to also double check when people are calling you to do stuff, and just double check and say, so what is it that you want? What is it that you are asking me to do for the gig, so that you are sure that that night you show up ready to do that particular thing? That's happened to me before. I mean, you know, you just have to check, because now we're living in a world where those boundaries are broken down, and we used to be kind of in the back in the day, as they say, the way that they would market you would be very specific, depending on what kind of music you were doing. I was a marketing person's nightmare because I was doing this and then that and then this and that and going back over there. And I was musically very satisfied being able to go from one thing to another really comfortably. It was very creative for me to be able to know what nuanced change I would need to make to be in this particular context, and what nuanced change I would be able to make to be authentic to each one of those things, because I loved all of that and liked doing that. But marketing hated that. Now with that structure being sort of out of the way, it becomes incumbent upon all of us to determine and check on making sure that the service of what we do as artists and as musicians has a chance of being accepted, because we are meeting the audience where they are. And it gives us an opportunity to then be able, when they trust that we're providing what it is they ask for, to take them further if we want to. So that's a lot of fun.
This clock just beeped loudly,
Yes.
which implies, okay, best laid plans, which implies that we're out of time, but I'm pretty sure we have 15 more minutes. Is that right? That's what I thought. Thank you. Can we take some questions from the audience? I can barely see anyone, so I'm going to have to rely on other people to do the handing off of the, house lights. Perfect. I can see much better now. Are there mics?
Hey.
Hello. I've been handed a microphone, so I'll ask a question.
We can
And,
barely hear you. Hang on. Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me now? Excellent.
Yes.
I guess this is loosely in the spirit of the theory of the idea of plans, and it's a question to all three of you, but kind of directed more at Patrice. Coming from like a jazz background, and I guess early on, I'm assuming you wanted to pursue a career as a performer, being heavily into piano and jazz and all of that. Do you think that it's efficient to have a plan for your career and really like zone in on that zone, or is it valuable to keep yourself spread and ready for something that may come along?
That's a great question, and I first have to say that your assumption that I wanted to play the piano and blah, 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 no, I wanted to be a film composer. That's what I wanted to do. I had no path. I didn't know the path at that time, but I wanted to do music for film and TV. The idea, too, of the kinds of things that come up and being able to take advantage of them based upon having a certain knowledge or a certain skill set, I think that's what allows for you to be able to craft a career. Our careers are portfolio careers. We don't set out and say, I'm going to do duh, and duh is going to happen. Along the way, some things may happen that are on that path to getting to what you want to do. But to be able to take advantage of each of those areas, particularly as artists, I gotta believe that they contribute to when you do reach a certain part of your destination as an artist, that those things that you did that seemingly were not related are very relatable, very transferable to what it is that you want to do. So in terms of all of the different kinds of things that I've done, here's the other part that I didn't get to say. I didn't do them all at the same time. They came up as they came up. And I was able to take advantage of each one. And like I said earlier, your last success sometimes introduces you to somebody who needs you to do something for them It might be completely a different thing, it might be the same thing, but it's usually something that is based upon them seeing something about you or the way you approach what you are doing that allows for them to be able to feel confident that you're the right person that they should call for this other thing that they're doing. So I would just say, if you really love music and you really have a goal in mind for what you want to do with your music, that you better give yourself every piece of insurance you've got that you can get to that dream multiple different ways by figuring out what the skills are that are the most important for what you want to do, and being able to really address those skills with a certain sense of confidence and elegance and intelligence and excellence, so that you're not denied where you're going. It's just these great different little roads that allow you to be able to get information delivering you to your goal.
Oh, this is on? Hi. Right here. Hi. I liked a lot how Patrice touched on the difference between, let's say, tempo syncing within a band, and with humans that's automatic, and with computers you're kind of like, it's a 1 or a 0, or it's like, you know, there's different constrictions on how your live performance is going to be. I'd like to ask Laura, when you work with live loopers, do you have a specific example how working with a live looper makes you more a virtuoso of your, let's say, groove or tempo management playing while you're playing solo, but you know, looper kind of, yeah, I feel live looping is like the middle between technology and like humans playing together. I'm not sure what my question is. Can you go on, help me with that?
I mean, live looping is, yeah, I mean, it's something that's very popular now, which is awesome to see it come so far, especially in the last 10 years, and people are like making specific foot controllers for looper, which is awesome. But I mean, it's obvious if you're out of time. I mean, I don't really know what the question is either, but it's obvious if you're out of time. So practicing with yourself and listening to the click and trying to just be on, because after you do every loop, if your buffer is too high and you're slightly off and it starts kind of swaying, and then it can just quickly turn into a hot mess. So I just generally try to stick as close as possible and have the click up loud and just try to lock into the tempo. And but I think, like my experiment with Berkeley last weekend and performing with the students, it was incredible to have us all looping and for that to actually be executed and work out. And I really see more of that happening, because it's like we were creating the music from scratch. Like, I took pride in the fact that there were no pre-programmed clips or loops or anything. Everything was built from the ground up, just from the instruments, the whole composition. And so there's like a whole art into creating the structure of a piece through just using loops and dropping things out and bringing things back in. And yeah, there's just a lot of creativity there. And there's a lot of amazing artists out there right now that are doing things that, and different ways to approach it. So, yeah. Okay, good.
I was going to ask a question, but you've been waiting longer than me, so I'm going to deliver you this one.
That's so nice of you. I was pretty sure I was going to give up. Hi, my name is Sassy Black. Thank you so much for being here. This is so cool. I I think it's awesome what you were saying about whistling, because I'm a vocalist, I'm a jazz trained vocalist, and so I'm a producer as well, obviously I'm here. But, I normally get people to clap and stomp along and we start singing if my stuff breaks down, which has happened a ton of times. But what I was gonna say is, how do you emotionally deal with mistakes happening? Because you're talking about, like, everyone's talking a lot about technically how you deal with it, you practice, you work on it, you prepare yourself for spontaneity, but how do you emotionally deal with mistakes happening, especially if it's at like a higher stakes kind of event, which naturally happens the more that you do music. There's going to be a risk that something like that's going to happen. And, a lot of the times musicians just work till they die. And, this is true, right? So like we work till we die, but how do you all emotionally cope with those type of instances?
Well, I guess in the moment, I've just found, I guess, just being at least for me, as calm as possible, because I know how I can get and how my mind will just derail if I'm freaking out. So it's, I've just found in the times of like being as grounded as possible in that moment and realizing like you don't have all the time in the world, but like in this second, you have all the time in the world to just take a second and just like address what's going on. And then people in the crowd, I think, really respect that too. They're like, I really like how you dealt with that. That was impressive, or that meant a lot that you were so calm. And but yeah, I think also, I don't know, with even just like the way, to me, it's not even a mistake a lot of times. It's just the way a gig went, and it's constantly this battle of like not judging myself, my entire career so far, based off this one little moment of silence in a gig. I guess, but I think it's crucial to have those things it's humbling, and it's an intense balance. So yeah, having moments that are like really just like, why am I doing, like this is really like, I don't deserve this, look what just happened, this is like, why am I here? But I think it happens to everyone, so that's also a nice reminder just to see everyone's vulnerable to it.
I think there's a power in that vulnerability on stage when you can admit that either you made a mistake or something's gone wrong. And there's also a power in moving past it and not hanging on to it, as we perfectionist musicians often do. And it's taken me a long time to like learn how to do that. So now I just work on just letting it go just right away and moving forward. And as far as self-care and all that kind of stuff, that's like a whole other panel discussion, but I've definitely had to learn how to take care of myself and not let my mind go to those places where it's like dragging me down, especially when mistakes or intense things happen, because they do, and it's all about how you react to those mistakes that will carry you to the next gig. Yeah.
I think too, knowing that as, the artist's personality, the reason that we do what we do and can take our feelings and turn them into music in whatever form we do is because we feel things really deeply all the time. And a big part of our discipline is not what's going on the stage and what we do when we're in our element on the stage. A big part of us, for us, has to be to remain calm and to understand that, we feel everything on 10. Always. If this is a good cup of coffee, it's a stupendous cup of coffee. If I've had a bad day because I got to take this knot out of my shoe, I'm ready to slit my wrist. It's the same intensity all the time. So I think part of our discipline has to be to understand that when we do things and it doesn't go as we had expected it to do, to be able to use it as an experience to kind of step back and look at it. Notice how many times we always are willing to examine the bad stuff and don't examine the good stuff. If we would also take stock after the good performances as to what it felt like, why it was good, what seemed to be within my control and what was not, what was that magic, that stuff that was happening that was just making things just flow, almost out of body experience. We have to review those in our minds too, so when the bad ones or the ones that don't go well happen, we don't attach our entire worth to that moment that didn't go well. We take away something that we say, okay, I got it, and we use it to try to best ourselves the next outing. Every gig is also supposed to be an offering of where we are today. We're gonna be somewhere else tomorrow. So it's a learned skill though, and I like what you were saying, Laura, about the idea of learning self-care, because we all gotta do that. Better, more than most.
Yeah.
If you would think of yourselves as elite athletes, there's things that you just can't do if you're gonna play. You just can't do it. When we get ready to be our best selves, to be able to be in the moment of whatever it is that we do, or be in that creative space or that vulnerable space to be able to try things or take risks, or be on stage to perform and in service to our colleagues or in service to our audience. There's just stuff you better not do so that you would be able to be in that moment in the best, at the best way possible. When you've done your very best, it's amazing how you don't feel so bad when something goes wrong that's out of your control. Some of why you feel really bad is that there's something that you maybe could have done to prevent it. And you kick yourself kicking and screaming at level 10 when you didn't do everything that was within your power. It's so much easier to let it go when you've done everything that you can.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, so please give it up one more time for Photay, Patrice, Rushen, and Laura Escudé.